Welcome back to Newsday. The Nigerian military last Wednesday said that it killed no fewer than 34 terrorists and recovered 23 AK-47 rifles during a failed retaliatory attack by elements of Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa province at Damboa local government area of Borno State. A statement by Director, Defense Media Operations, Major General Edward Buba, outlined that 6 of both ground and air components of Operation Haden Kai, who repelled the attack, were killed during the operation, while troops also recovered more than 200 rounds of 7.62 mm special ammunition. The guest that we'll be speaking with is security analyst Dr. Kabiru Adamu. Thank you so much, Dr. Adamu, for joining us on Newsday.
My pleasure. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So what's your reaction, to this operation, to this retaliatory attack that some say was failed, but in the meantime, 6 soldiers lost their lives? What's your reaction to that?
So first off, I would like to isolate the attack, and then also after isolating the attack, I would also look at the bigger picture. The location of the attack in Damboa, which is on the fringes of southern Borno. If you divide Borno into 3, northern Borno, central Borno, and then southern Borno has received the lowest attacks and sort of attention by the 2 major groups that are operating in Borno. That is the Jamaat al-Ahl Sunnah al-Dawati wal-Jihad, and then the Islamic State in West Africa province. With particular reference to Damboa, where this forward operating base is located, it is sandwiched very close to Sambisa Forest and Alagano Forest. And so the possibility of a constant attention by either of these 2 groups, especially ISWAP, that has more presence in that location, was always there. And given the fact that of recent, there may have been a redeployment and reduction of the capabilities of the Nigerian armed forces in parts of the northeast, then we always knew that this attack was a possibility. It's also very possible that perhaps as a means to detract attention from that location, the ISWAP operatives in particular attempted to carry out that attack. Now, irrespective, whatever the objective is, it has brought attention to the fact that forward operating bases used to be targets of attack. If you recall, a few years ago, in particular between 2018 up until 2022, forward operating bases were significantly being attacked by this group. But then we saw a reduction after a re-strategization by the Nigerian military. So we're hoping that this will not be a commencement of another round of attacks on forward operating bases in the northeast of the country.
Wow. Thank you for that. Now, President Tinubu has appropriated in the 2025 budget about 4.91 trillion naira for defense and security. With this number, what is your level of confidence that there will be enough political will to fight the terrorists in the new year? Is this enough?
So it's not only about money. Yeah, money is important. But what is even more important is financial accountability, to make sure the money is used for appropriate measures that would allow, especially, and I will always repeat this, the drivers of insecurity. You want to make sure the oxygen that allows the terrorists, that allows the criminal groups to continue their operation, that oxygen is blocked. And what are these oxygen? They are funding capabilities. You want to make sure you block that. And I'm very happy that recently the Chief of Defense Staff highlighted that element. The second thing is their ability to recruit and regenerate. And then the third thing is their ability to acquire weapons. And then, of course, if the logistics that they are able to use. So they use motorbikes, they use vehicles, they need fuel for that, they need to maintain those vehicles. And then, of course, they also collect levies and taxes from local communities. So unfortunately, this money that you mentioned, the 4.9, is not really about that. A significant portion of this money is really about the kinetic component. That's for the military to buy weapons, for the other security agencies to also improve their capabilities. And this is what worries me. We need to change our strategy. You hear our public security managers using the phrase all of government approach and then all of society approach. But with all sense of responsibility, I don't see them implementing it. We need to move from this kinetic approach where we are to now ensure the non-kinetic approach also matches with the kinetic approach. So in other words, we need to see the state government in particular embracing this non-kinetic component so that every time a budget is brought up at the federal level and then at the state level, these drivers and triggers of insecurity that I've identified, including socioeconomic issues, education or lack of it as the case may be, climate change, weapons proliferation, all of this are embedded into our budgeting program so that at the end of the day, we're able to see a holistic map that allows us to achieve this all of government and all of society approach. At the moment, I'm very sorry to say we are not achieving that. There are 3 instruments that are being used for addressing terrorism in particular in the country, and I'll quickly mention them. The National Counterterrorism Strategy, which was introduced in 2016, then the policy framework on countering violent extremism introduced in 2017, and then the Terrorism Prohibition and Prevention Law as amended in 2022. We haven't really evaluated these 3 instruments to ask the critical question, how well are we implementing these 3 instruments at the federal level and at the state level? So it's not about money, but it's about this holistic approach. Let the coordinating elements within the national security system, sector, let those coordinating elements sit down, do an evaluation, identify gaps, and then make sure they go about achieving the whole of government and the whole of society approach to security.
Now, Dr. Adamu, I'm also wondering what can be done to curtail the movement of the terrorists who reportedly arrived at the military base riding on motorcycles and gun trucks, which is their normal modus operandi. How come they seem to have free reign of the roads? How can this be curbed?
It's an indication of the failure of our intelligence capabilities. The attack happened around 16 hours, 4 p.m. So it didn't happen at night. It didn't happen in the early mornings. It was in broad daylight. And like you rightly indicated, they moved on gun trucks. They must have conducted surveillance. So if our intelligence capabilities was adequate, we should have been able to detect them. Having said that, one of the gaps and weaknesses, I'm mindful I'm on a public platform, so I'm also mindful of what I say. That particular forward operating base in southern Borno, it's isolated. So it also allowed them to continue their attack with very little reinforcement. The speed of the reinforcement was slowed down by the fact that they also anticipated that, and they weakened the capability of our military to conduct reinforcement. So it's all about intelligence. And like I said earlier on, if we have achieved an all of society, all of government and all of society approach, our intelligence capabilities would have been emboldened. People around in the communities would have seen that movement. They would have made calls and would have deployed speedily to prevent that attack from happening. Our intelligence, unfortunately, is still extremely weak.
And speaking of the individuals in the local communities, what's their relationship with the security forces? We know a few weeks back there was that news of the accidental bombing in Sokoto, in a village in Sokoto State. So we're wondering what the military's approach to the civilians are. We know that communities are often accused of harboring the very bandits and terrorists who in turn use them as human shields. How do we get the locals to change the perception that sometimes these criminal elements aren't their saviors after all, or even just to stay out of the military's way so that they can conduct their business without any interference or casualties?
I mean, I would commend the Borno state government. They evolved an initiative called the Borno model. It's a very interesting model. It's been internationally acclaimed. And it has allowed for, of course, in conjunction with some of elements within the federal government, has allowed for the surrendering of about 126,000 members and their families, of course, of the Jamaat al-Ahl Sunnah Lil-Dawati wal Jihad and the Islamic State in West Africa province, as well as Ansaru group. So if we isolate Borno State, I would say they've learned from a decade or more of the insurgency, and they are evolving ways to enhance public support and community resilience. And that is why we're seeing the Borno model being effective. But then if you go to the northwest of the country, I don't think that lesson has been learned, unfortunately. I think some elements within the Northwest would need to learn from Borno State, especially this Borno model that I've mentioned. But having said that, if we come back to the military, they do have instruments for civil-military cooperation. As an example, I know that they've set up departments on CIMIC, civil-military corporations. They've also advanced ways of non-kinetic warfare. So you see medical outreach, you see the construction of bridges, you see sometimes makeshift markets are being erected. All of these are ways of evolving and building community support for military operations. But it is work in progress. It is not yet Uhuru. We need to have, in our defense policy, a clear instrument that allows that. And it can't be the work of the military alone. The political class in particular would also need to step in, just like the Borno State government did. We need to see more of that across different segments of the society where the political class steps in to support the role of the military. Non-kinetic warfare cannot be the only thing that the military can do. It's the work of the political class. Actually, the military can only step in very rare instances to support the non-kinetic component. So overall, it is work in progress, but we need to have a holistic approach. And this holistic approach is encapsulated in one of the instruments I mentioned earlier on, the policy framework on countering violent extremism. It provides that everyone, from me, an ordinary citizen, to you, the media, to the market woman, should support the security policy. The challenge, however, is that we're not implementing that document. So we need to go back to that document, implement it fully. And I call on the National Assembly to step in. They are the ones who should conduct oversight and ask the question, why are these instruments not being implemented? For as long as we don't implement these instruments, we are not going to end this challenge that we have in the country. They should step in, conduct an evaluation, find out why we're not implementing those instruments, and then encourage the implementation of the instruments so that we can have an all-of-society approach where the community would own up and exercise the instruments that exist within our national security apparatus.
Very well said. Security analyst Dr. Kabiru Adamu, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.